Hello and welcome to Indus News Live with me, Osman Lone. We begin this hour with our top story, and that's US President Donald Trump saying Iran is planning an attack on the US embassy in Iraq and will be held responsible for it. In a tweet, Trump says the US conducted airstrikes in Iraq and Syria in response to the killing of an American contractor. He said Washington expects Iraq to protect the US embassy in Baghdad, which was stormed by protesters earlier today. A security post at the entrance to the embassy was set ablaze by protesters who chanted "Death to America" and called for the embassy to be closed. The US ambassador to Iraq and other staff have been safely evacuated from the embassy. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi denounced international bullying in a meeting with his Iranian counterpart Javad Zarif in Beijing. Wang said Beijing will continue its efforts to save the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. During the meeting, Wang reaffirmed the strength of bilateral ties with Tehran and a mutual stand against unilateralism. Zarif said China and Iran will stand up for their national interests and uphold multilateralism. China was a signatory to the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran and has strongly criticized the US for abandoning it. Zarif's visit follows a trip to Russia and the first ever drills among the navies of the three countries in the Indian Ocean. Meanwhile, the US says it's shown restraint against Iran, but the killing of an American citizen by the Hezbollah brigade in Iraq crossed a red line. Earlier, an American contractor in Kirkuk was killed in a rocket attack by an allegedly Iranian-backed militia. US State Department Special Representative Brian Hook said Tehran should not confuse Washington's restraint for weakness. He said it's important for President Trump to order armed forces to respond in a way Iran will understand. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the assault on the Hezbollah brigade was a defensive action to deter Iran. Well, in Pyongyang, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calls for an offensive measure to ensure the country's security. His comments come ahead of a year-end deadline he set with the United States to shift its stance on nuclear negotiations. Talks on denuclearizing the Korean peninsula stalled since they broke down in Hanoi at the beginning of the year. Pyongyang has demanded the easing of sanctions imposed over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, while Washington insists it takes more tangible steps towards giving them up. The Arab League will hold an emergency meeting today to discuss the situation in Libya. Egypt called for the meeting after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced he would send troops to Libya. President Erdogan said Turkey may deploy troops as soon as next month at the request of the UN-backed Government of National Accord. Libya has been locked in a civil war splitting power between two rival groups, the GNA in Tripoli and Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army in the east. Well, in Sudan, it says it will send troops to West Darfur and suspend peace talks with rebel groups for 24 hours. Government officials say the pause is in response to an outbreak of violence around the regional capital. In a statement, Sudan's Sovereign Council said the armed forces and the security bodies will contain the situation. The Information Ministry said the head of the Transitional Ruling Council, plus the Prime Minister, will visit West Darfur. It said aircraft will evacuate the wounded to the capital, Khartoum. Violence flared up in the regional capital, Al-Fashir, after a Rapid Support Forces soldier was stabbed to death with two of his relatives. In Somalia, Al-Qaeda-backed Al-Shabaab terrorist groups have claimed responsibility for Saturday's car bombing in Mogadishu that killed at least 80 people. But the country's National Security Agency says the attack was planned by a foreign country. Al-Shabaab spokesperson say they targeted a convoy of Turkish mercenaries and apostate militia who were escorting them. Meanwhile, the agency said it will use foreign assistance to probe the assault. The bombing was the deadliest in over 2 years in the country, wrecked by 3 decades of violence and civil war. India now, where Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan has moved a resolution against the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act in the State Assembly. Criticizing the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, Vijayan said the central government is trying to divide Indians on communal lines. The Chief Minister said Kerala's tradition is of inclusivity and this assembly needs to maintain it. He said this new law is a violation of the fundamental right of equality as guaranteed by the Constitution of India. The Chief Minister earlier said the Citizenship Act will have no place in Kerala and the state will not implement it. He also said no detention centres will be built in his area. Well, staying with India, thousands of Indians are set to ringing the new year by holding protests against the controversial citizenship law. This comes despite Prime Minister Narendra Modi's attempts to dampen demonstrations that have run for nearly 3 weeks now. Rights activists, civil societies and political parties will rally in New Delhi, Mumbai and Kolkata. In New Delhi, agitators will gather outside Jama Masjid while an all-women sit-in is to continue at Shaheen Bagh. Police said they plan to deploy additional forces in Delhi on New Year's Eve with traffic curbs in some parts. Meanwhile, over in Hyderabad, at least 2 small groups of demonstrators have been organising flash protests. Well, as the chaos continues in India, the use of facial recognition software at Prime Minister Narendra Modi's rally in New Delhi has sparked privacy fears in the country. Police use facial recognition software to screen crowds, and that's a first for the country. An Indian digital advocacy group called Internet Freedom Foundation said the use of system surveillance at public gatherings is illegal. The foundation said the software was originally developed to find missing children, but police are using it for mass scrutiny. It said this step directly impairs the rights of citizens of assembly, speech and political participation. Earlier, technology site Comparitech ranked Delhi among the world's top 20 surveilled cities. Well, we've just seen the fireworks in Australia, but 4,000 people are trapped on a beach in the southeastern town of Malakuta after fleeing from a massive bushfire. Elsewhere, 2 more people have been killed in New South Wales, pushing the death toll now to 12. Rescue officials say the bodies of 2 men believed to be father and son were found in the town of Corbago. In Malakuta, officials say thousands were forced to stay on the beach, while some boarded small boats under red skies. Authorities have asked residents and tourists to stay put because evacuation processes are dangerous. Temperatures have topped 40 degrees Celsius, with strong winds triggering over 200 new fires just in one day. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break, so do stay with us. Hello again and welcome back. Now to the Philippines, where the death toll from Typhoon Panphone has risen to 50, while 5 people remain missing. The storm left the country on Saturday after battering central Visayas, with officials continuing to assess the damage. Emergency services saw the typhoon has affected more than 2 million people, with 80,000 still in temporary shelters. They said 143 people were injured and over 378,000 homes damaged. The government estimates the damage to agriculture and infrastructure to be in the region of some $21 million. It was the year's 21st typhoon to hit the country, with winds gusting of up to 150 kilometers per hour. 6 people have been killed after a tunnel under construction collapsed in China's northern Shanxi province. Officials said 6 people were trapped by the accident in the city of Jincheng. Rescuers made their way through 200 cubic meters of debris blocking the tunnel. Authorities said 1 worker was rescued and died later on at a nearby hospital. Microsoft says it's taken control of 50 web domains used by a North Korean hacking group. The company said Thallium tricked online users by fraudulently using Microsoft brands and trademarks. Microsoft said the hackers targeted government employees, think tanks and university staff working on nuclear proliferation issues. The tech company said most targets were based in the US, Japan and South Korea. The Redmond, which is a Washington-based business, said it took control of domains under a U.S. federal court order. Microsoft said this is the fourth nation-state group it has acted against in such a way. Well, Brazil's Ministry of Justice has imposed a fine of over $1.5 million on Facebook for improperly sharing user data. The ministry's Department of Consumer Protection said data from 443,000 users was shared. It said the data was made available to developers of an app called This Is Your Digital Life. Facebook said it had made changes to the platform and restricted the information accessible to app developers. In a statement, the tech giant said it's looking at legal options in the case. Now, 2019 was a consequential year to say the least. Many events took place that could shape the world in the coming decade. Those include the rise of Islamophobia, terrorism, and government protests, and of course, India's escalation on the line of control. Indus News takes a look back of the year's events in 2019 in this report.
Terrorism emerged as a threat to people everywhere once again in 2019. The Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka conducted by ISIS were the deadliest terrorist incident of the year. "259 people were killed and over 500 injured in separate bomb blasts in 3 churches and 3 hotels. In New Zealand, the Christchurch terror attack revealed the dangers of unbridled Islamophobia. 51 people were shot dead at the Al Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Centre by a white supremacist Australian national. The heinous attack was live-streamed on Facebook. In occupied Kashmir, India illegally revoked the valley's special status as a disputed territory on the 5th of August. To force the local population into compliance with the move, New Delhi shut down communications and put the valley under curfew. The lockdown has been in effect since 5th of August and thousands of Kashmiris have been arrested. People across the world also rose up against government corruption and oppression. There were violent protests in Hong Kong against a now revoked extradition bill that remains ongoing today. Similar protests were also held in Sudan, Lebanon, Bolivia, and Iraq. In Lebanon and Sudan, the protesters successfully ousted their heads of state. The worrying symptoms of climate crisis also became more apparent than ever. Massive heat waves killed over 180 people in India and over 160 in Japan. Changing weather patterns were also blamed for typhoons in Africa, Japan, and China. The worst was Cyclone Idai in southeastern Africa, which killed over 1,000 people and caused damages worth over $2 billion. In a major setback in the fight against climate change, almost 100,000 hectares of Amazon rainforest in Brazil were destroyed in wildfires that started in January and remain ongoing today. Wildfires also caused significant damage in the US, Indonesia, and Australia. These were some of the biggest events of the year and are likely to have major consequences for the next decade.
Well, 2019 was also an interesting year for... Well, 2019 was also an interesting year for world politics. Donald Trump became the third US president in history to be impeached, and that's only after 12 months before he faces re-election. Great Britain, the United Kingdom, had 2 prime ministers and made certain of a Brexit, while in India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is facing a severe backlash, resistance and tougher circumstances than ever before. Indus News takes a look at some of the key events in world politics in 2019.
2019 has been chaotic, even by US President Donald Trump's standards, but impeachment always seemed unlikely. That is until September, when a scandal about his dealings with the new administration in Ukraine was exposed. Trump allegedly used a conversation on the phone to press the Ukrainian president into investigating the local business affairs of ex-Vice President Joe Biden's son. Biden is one of the Democratic Party's biggest candidates for the presidency in the 2020 elections. An impeachment inquiry was soon launched by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
The facts are uncontested. The president abused his power for his own personal political benefit at the expense of our national security by withholding military aid and crucial Oval Office meeting in exchange for an announcement of an investigation into his political rival.
Over in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson had more luck. Former Prime Minister Theresa May failed to get her Brexit bill through Parliament 3 times. She eventually had to step down in May. This was Johnson's moment to step in. He won the leadership election to become Prime Minister 3 years after his first pitch for the job was derailed, giving Theresa May the keys to number 10.
And that we come together as a new Parliament to break the deadlock and finally to get Brexit done. Now is the moment as we leave the European Union to reunite our country and allow the warmth and natural affection that we all share for our European neighbours to find renewed expression in one great new national project of building a deep, special and democratically accountable partnership with those nations we are proud to call our closest friends.
Another leader had a more mixed year. Narendra Modi won an unprecedented landslide victory in India's general election. Even Congress's Rahul Gandhi was swept out of his family-held seat in Amethi. But Modi hasn't had it all his own way. First, revoking Kashmir's autonomy and all but introducing martial law has only made the state angrier and harder to hold down. Then amending all citizenship laws to target Muslims by removing their nationality and offering Indian citizenship to non-Muslims in neighboring states has brought tens of thousands of protesters onto the streets. They met often brutal police violence with determination. With volatility the main theme of global politics for the last 5 years, 2019 was never going to be easy. 2020 is unlikely to be any different.
Now in business news, Moscow and Kiev have signed a 5-year agreement to safeguard the transit of Russian gas to Europe through Ukraine. Under the new deal, Kiev will collect over $7 billion in gas transit fees by the year 2024. Ukraine's gas company Naftogaz will transmit 65 billion cubic meters of Russian gas in the year 2020. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Europe knows Kiev will not fail in energy security. Moscow and Kiev have been pushing to reach a new accord because the current agreement ends today. Well, it's 8 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but don't forget, for the latest updates on all of our stories, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news. Bye-bye.